and good afternoon. It is my pleasure to be here with you on what is our fifth session in the series entitled The Black Education Experience in the United States, Testaments of Courage, Freedom, Resilience, and Dignity. Over the course of this series, we are looking at the ways in which the African American community has engaged in both innovation, ingenuity, acts of resistance, all toward the effort of expanding our understandings of democracy in this country through the fields of education and the pursuit of educational equity. Today's session, the revelation of Black studies, from protest to empowerment. The most lasting impact of the Black Power movement was how it changed Black people's perception. The self-hatred imposed by segregation's apartheid value system that prioritized whiteness at the pinnacle of an oppressive system that was standard for all fields and statuses within the society was shed by Black people during this period under the shining light of Black activism. No better leader articulated this shift in consciousness than Malcolm X. It is no coincidence that within a year of his assassination, three central phases or phrases that he either coined or initiated would take hold and form in three separate yet connected movements. That being the movements of Kwanzaa, what we now understand as the holiday of Kwanzaa, also the Black Panther Party for self-defense, as well as the Black arts movement itself. With Kwanzaa established in Los Angeles in 1966 as a practice for African American people, as a point of pride, to take pride in our heritage, in the history and achievements and struggle of Black people throughout the world. The vision articulated by Malcolm X with respect to Black power, the understanding that Black people have the capacity to achieve their own ends. This concept is understood today as self-determination, would take form in the development of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. I share this picture here specifically to offset and even counter the often sensationalized image of Black Panthers bearing guns. That was only a minimal aspect of the actual daily work that they did. This here is depicting a Black Panther member serving breakfast to children before they're going to school, which became a practice of the Panthers that in fact preceded the free breakfast programs that now are evidenced in many public schools across this country. In addition, the Panthers also enacted health clinics, providing free health care for African Americans in poor communities. The concept of Black is beautiful that countered the generations old idea of Blackness being ugly, Blackness being that which you despise. You would call each other Black as a disparaging term. Black took on a new understanding during this period as beautiful, heard in the songs of James Brown and Aretha Franklin and others. The Black arts movement, headed up by the likes of Amiri Baraka, Sonia Sanchez, and others, would embody in the literature of this period of working class Black folks an idea and conception, a self-concept that articulated a notion of beauty that ran counter to and was an act of resistance to the white dominant conception of beauty that prioritized blonde hair and blue eyes. These phrases, Black is beautiful, Black power, Black pride, took on new meaning and magnitude for a people who had been taught to despise their color and denigrate their own culture. These movements would be synthesized in the rise of Black studies on college campuses across the country. This did not happen by happenstance, of course, as if there's anything that we've learned across these sessions, is that whatever Black people have achieved in this society has occurred as a consequence of organized struggle. The development of the first Black Studies program in this country in higher education came as the consequence of what is, to history, the longest student strike in United States history. San Francisco State, then college, now university, the development of what would become Black Studies was, in fact, occurred under these conditions. When we read the history, we learn that there were other students on the campus, of course, who were also not white, and were also concerned about their civil rights, were also concerned for equal rights, and were also concerned for the ways in which their history was being taught in the curriculum. They would join in with the African-American students on campus and develop something that would be called the Third World Organization. This group, called the Third World Liberation Front, which comprised Asian American students, Latinx students, Arab American students, and others, Native American students, were a clear effort to not just align with the demands being put forward by the Black students on campus, but also reflected their own understanding of the necessity of struggle with respect to their own communities. Many of these communities were, many of these students were first generation immigrants themselves and had came to this country with notions of, America is the promised land, and if you work hard and you do this and do that. And those dreams and myths were clearly put to the side very quickly during this period of turmoil in this country on the question of civil rights. One of the founding members of the Third World Liberation Front, Lenata Warjack, a Native American student there, states, "It's very important to acknowledge us as a people with a culture and not to just leave us without any kind of acknowledgement. To keep us without any recognition or acknowledgement is to say that we don't exist, and we do." This was the attitude of students involved in this student strike. It was a demand for acknowledgement, a demand that our history, our culture, our thinking, our notions, our desires are necessary and they matter. Clearly, as you can see here, students were not met with welcomed hands by the administration, and as a consequence would engage in sit-ins to express, taking a tactic from the civil rights movement, from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, those students that actually went into Black communities to register Black folks to vote, and the struggles that they experienced to integrate the restaurants in segregated America. They took those same tactics, brought them onto the campus to achieve their ends. When it was all said and done, Mariah Bohannon, in Insight into Diversity, the December 2019 issue, in her article, African American History, a look back at early student activism, states that by the end of the Black campus movement in 1972, 13 students had been killed during campus demonstrations and more than 100 college presidents were ousted. It is estimated that students at 1,000 institutions across 49 states engaged in campus activism to demand better treatment and support of African American students, employees, and communities during this time period. Their efforts soon spurred similar movements for other marginalized student groups and helped propel the ongoing struggle for equity in higher education. Where are we today? In light of this history, in light of the bloody history and the efforts that working class Black students and other students of color made during what is likely one of the most tumultuous periods in American history, we need to sit back and then reflect on, you know, where have we come? How far have we come? So let's consider that. In a report that was done maybe about a decade ago, it was determined that after investigating 1,777 college campuses across the country, they found that 20% of those campuses had formal Black studies or African American studies departments. Another 50% had Black studies courses, not whole departments, not major departments, but courses taught in those schools. They also found that 50% of this 20% that had formal departments, 50% of that 20% also were housed in colleges that also had an attendant Latinx studies component. If we reflect on the fact that there were demands that were made by those students that led to the development of what today we understand as Black studies or African American studies programs and ethnic studies across the board, among other developments, we might want to ask what then would be the most critical demand of Black students today, understanding, given, again, the lessons that we've learned up to this point, the struggle for educational equity is still ongoing in this nation. Student debt is the most critical conversation that is had today with respect to the realities faced by incoming as well as students who have graduated from college campuses. That reality is even more critical for African American students. In an article published in Forbes magazine just this summer entitled "Cancel Black Student Debt as Reparations," the writer indicates that's why 31%, when discussing this question of student debt overall, he says that's why 31% of Black families have education loans compared with only 20% of white families, despite the fact that Black students go to college at a lower rate than white students. And worse, once Black students graduate, they face a discriminatory labor market that pays them less. So they've borrowed more, but can't recoup the costs of their degrees at the same rate as others. Borrowing more, but making less is connected to higher default rates. Research shows that the median Black graduate with a bachelor's degree is more likely to default on their student loans than a white student who dropped out of college with student debt. That's an astounding finding, given that on average, students who don't finish are most likely to default. Now, this is very telling and sobering, that the rate for Black graduates with respect to defaulting on loans is higher than those white students who actually drop out of college. In a conversation that was held by the NAACP most recently on the question of the realities facing Black college students and Black graduates of college of colleges, and this question of student debt, Karan Blair, who is the executive director of the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools, shared this. He says, "We are clear that education justice cannot be separated from the conversation about racial justice. The inequities observed in K through 12 and higher education spaces are deeply connected to the legacy and continued prevalence of racism in this country. And so, when we talk about student debt, we are talking profoundly about a racial justice issue. And it is my sincere hope that by this point in our series, no one should have a doubt as to why that is so." What you see here is a picture that many folks who are watching this likely recall. This is a picture of African-American students at Howard University, just a few days following the murder of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, by the police there. Young Michael Brown, as you recall, was a young man, 18, 19 years of age, who was shot and killed in broad daylight. 6 bullets riddled his body before it fell there on the ground and was left there in that street for over 4 hours. It became a lightning rod protest across this country that in fact sparked the Black Lives Matter movement. Michael Brown and the development of the Black Lives Matter movement and the way in which Black college students took to the streets, organized on their campus in relationship to this demand signals a connection back to this history. Just as the students of the 60s who recognized their critical relationship to their home communities and to the conditions that those folk were faced with and resisting against, brought those concerns in their bodies to those campuses and sought to achieve equity with respect to the experiences they were having on those campuses as well. In fact, that student strike that I shared with you at the start of this presentation that led to the development of the first Black Studies program in this country, at a college in this country, was the direct consequence of also an act of police violence, no different than what occurred on August 4, 2014 in Ferguson, Missouri. September 27, 1966,
Matthew Johnson.
Shot and killed by police, a 16-year-old boy, shot and killed by police in San Francisco. This event is the decisive event that would lead to Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, both college students, to develop the Black Panther Party for self-defense 1 month later. What you see here is the newspaper of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, that famed organization that was responsible for, again, registering folks during the civil rights movements to vote throughout the South. It was an interracial organization. The California chapter's newsletter covered this story. What you see there is the picture of Matthew Johnson's casket, the age of 16. 1 month later, Huey Newton, who had been a part of a Black Studies cadre in the campus where he attended college, was studying the history of Black people, was engaged in conversation on the affairs of the time in which he was alive, recognized that there needed to be, that something needed to be done. And he decided, with his friend Bobby Seale, to develop the Black Panther Party for self-defense as a consequence. And on October 15, 1966, indeed, the Black Panther Party for self-defense would become a reality. How this ties directly to the student strike, the Black student strike at San Francisco State that would lead to the first Black Studies program, is because the Minister of Education for the Black Panther Party would be terminated. He was also a grad student at San Francisco State who was an instructor in the English program. When the trustee board of the college learned that he was an active member of the Black Panthers, they fired him. That was the spark that led to Black students organizing on that campus. In an NPR interview, March 21st, 2019, entitled "The Student Strike That Changed Higher Ed Forever," he reads, "One of the most prominent on-campus organizers at San Francisco State was George Murray, a popular graduate student who taught freshman English. Murray had a second job as the Minister of Education for the Black Panther Party. He was fiercely anti-Vietnam, and his politics got him suspended from campus in 1968. And that was it. The strike kicked off," said Jerry Bernardo, who was co-founder of the first Black Student Union at San Francisco State. So what does this all teach us? The events of the past, the events of the present should make clear that an unequal system is an unjust system. An unjust system can only be maintained through violence because no self-respecting people ever accepts inequality and injustice. As it was true then, and as is true today, Black students on college campuses are connected to the communities from which they come, the hopes and aspirations of their families that they carry forward matter. And as a consequence of that relationship that cannot be severed, there will always be a response from those who are attending colleges of higher learning regarding the concerns that are being faced by those they left behind in their homes, in their home communities. What this teaches us is that Black resistance matters. As I shared before, you cannot name me any advancement that has been made by African Americans in this country that did not come as a consequence of struggle, and not just struggle, but organized struggle. The realities that Black folk face to this day, as we're getting closer to the conclusion of our series, and the point of this series was to help people appreciate what Black Lives Matter is all about, why it is here, what are the conditions that led to its rise, and what then ought to be done to help to ensure that the causes for which Black Lives Matter is here will not have to be repeated. Clearly, as we've seen in this nation's history, there is a cycle of oppression that Black people have been forced to face. Every generation has been made to be confronted by white supremacist violence in the bodies of white citizens, as well as that promoted by and accepted by and supported by the state in the bodies of those who are given the badge to so-called protect and serve. These are the questions of our time. And what we must always remember is that if we are to get on the right side of history, the right side of history is always on the side of resistance to oppression. That is our lesson. And that Black studies is the mode through which not just the articulation of the history of Black people, but the study of and the analysis of the struggles of Black people to not just benefit Black folks, but again, to enlarge what we understand as democracy, justice, and equality for all people. And if you needed a lesson on that, all you need to do is read the front page of the news today to witness how those that are against democracy, equality, and justice are going out of their way to deny reality itself and to target the efforts made, the democratic effort made by Black people to have their voice heard in this prior election. The times we're living in are quite challenging, but But the best avenue to appreciate and understand what must be done at this hour is through the avenue of what Black people have always done in this society. For those that are interested in learning more about this history, you are highly encouraged to consider these 3 critical books: Changing Academia Forever, Black Student Leaders Analyze the Movement They Led, by Kitty Kelly Epstein and Bernard Stringer; White Money, Black Power, The Surprising History of African American Studies and the Crisis of Race in Higher Education, by Noliwe M. Rooks; The Black Campus Movement, Black Students in the Racial Reconstitution of Higher Education, 1965 to 1972, by Ibram H. Rogers. And those that are ready to dive even deeper, if you belong to an institution on the college campus or elsewhere in the nonprofit world and want to explore these ideas and want to figure out how to do this work with respect to your institution to further the work of equity and justice, I invite you to consider the consultation of the organization that I found, Origin. And check us out. Our website is racial-justice.org. And it is always a pleasure to do this work with the Kaplan Education Foundation as they continue to do this work. This organization is that bridge from this very past that we discussed, as they try to widen the gates of inclusion on college campuses across this country. It is indeed my honor to be a part of this organization, partnering in this particular way at this time. Thank you so much.
Hello, and welcome to another session of the Kaplan Educational Foundation's series on the Black educational experience in the United States, Testaments of Courage, Freedom, Resilience, and Dignity. I am excited to be here once again with Ewaro Seyande as well as Rhoda Tamaklo. I hope you watched the video. I was watching it. I always feel like it is a treat for me to watch it multiple times before we make it here. And each time I learn something new. I always have to acknowledge that learning about our own history is probably the best gift that we can give ourselves. And our history is so rich that I think in sharing it with others, the life of everyone that sees, this series will be enriched and really filled with the understanding of what it takes for a community to continue in the pursuit of not just betterment for the community and themselves, but also to do it through the process of education. As you know, it is the Kaplan Educational Foundation's mission is really focused on bringing students of color from low-income backgrounds, again, unapologetic. We are focused in the African American population as well as the Latino population in the US. And that is because of the historic underrepresentation of these groups in the United States. Yes, we are in 2020. Many of these institutions were built long, long time ago. And yes, there continues to be underrepresentation. So when I get together with Aware and with Rhoda, there's always going to be a discussion that I listen to and that I also continue to learn from. So first, thank you both for being here. And I am here, as I always say, as a student. And so thank you. And so I leave it up to the two of you to lead us through this discussion. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Nancy. And thank you for making this possible. I know your leadership on this is key, that we even get to have these types of discussions. And so in leaning into this, one of the things that I've reflected on over this past month is, I am dialing in from Sandy Hook, Connecticut, is the role of violence and how the world unfolds. And so Aware, just like Nancy, I was watching this again, probably for the fourth or fifth time. I think you've done an eloquent job of explaining and kind of threading the needle of how violence and narrative, and there's a lot of things at play here. And I wonder, in opening this up for us, could you talk a little bit more about the role of white violence in the racial justice movements?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, yes, thank you, Rhoda. Good to be here. Nancy, thank you for providing this platform for what I believe is not just a necessary conversation, but a critical, a central conversation in the times that we're living in presently. Yeah, so as you recall in the lesson today, what we saw was, and the point was to make a parallel vision, right? To help folk appreciate that what we're seeing today is in many ways a replication of what we saw would occurred in this country back in the 60s with respect to the question of education and educational equity, educational access, inclusion in the curriculum, et cetera. These questions still remain with us. And the pivotal piece to it is the role that white violence plays with respect to movements for racial justice as directed by Black people. What do I mean? As we saw, as you saw in the lesson today, it was the direct consequence of the police murder of an African-American young man in 1966 that led to the development of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, one of its members was at the time an instructor at San Francisco State College, then called College. As a consequence of conservative operatives, mainly people on the trustee board and the government, learned of this person's activism on campus and his instructions on campus, terminated. This would lead to students, primarily Black students, but as you heard, not just Black students, organizing in what would become the longest student strike in US history that would culminate in the development of Black studies. So here we have an act of violence perpetuated against Black people that would lead to the development of a critical marker with respect to American history, that being the development of African-American studies, the recognition by the Academy that the study and analysis of the African-American experience is of critical importance in the world of letters, in the world of higher education. That is to say that it is vital for for an individual's ability to function in society, in US society, to have a walking, working knowledge of the experience of African-American peoples. That did not occur as a consequence of San Francisco State president waking up one day saying, aha, I know what we should do. We should institute Black studies in the curriculum. It was the direct consequence of African-American students recognizing within their own community, within their own community struggle, within their own community's journey in this country, a story that needs to be told. And based on that, and what is the line here? And this is the piece. The line is dignity. This is the message I want folks to walk away with. That when you cross that line of any people, but certainly with the African-American experience teaches us that when you cross that line of dignity, of, in this case, killing innocent people, people who have not had the benefit of a trial, that's what this is about. That's what it was about then. That's what it was about with George Floyd. When you do that, you strike a nerve within the African-American community. And the result is what it is. And so, that is to say those, to flip it, to say it the other way, those that have trouble with Black Lives Matter, those who have trouble with calls to defund the police, abolish the police, et cetera, well, remove white violence. There wouldn't be Black folks marching in the streets. There wouldn't be Black Lives Matter. Remove the critical aspect of the action against the dignity, the humanity of the people, and these movements would not occur. You fail to do that.
Yeah.
And history speaks as to what you should expect. As I stated in the lesson, no self-respecting people accepts oppression. African Americans have made it very clear who we understand ourselves to be. From the very first lesson, we never consider ourselves slaves. We never consider ourselves second-class citizens. We understood then that first generation of Africans off the boat in chains recognized within themselves the spark of divinity that lies within every human being on the planet, and recognized their equality with the people who enslaved them. And they've never let up. And we've never let up that fight.
No.
So that's the point. That's the point that we need to make here. And in this day, that last, one of the last slides I shared, where you saw the Howard University students, demonstrate, for me, that when that photo was, shared across social media, for me, it captures this history. You see these students, literally presenting their bodies to the world, saying, hands up, don't shoot. Yet knowing that even in that act of surrendering, that's the sign of surrender.
Yeah. Oh,
that
international.
Even in surrendering, we are not guaranteed justice. We are not guaranteed peace. It is a remarkable feat that is a mark to the spirit of a people who know intimately well the evils of oppression.
That I need a minute, I'm gonna be honest, because this is something heavy that you're laying on us. And one of the things that this series and the work I do has called me to do is to examine my own path, right? I feel that without true introspection, one cannot join the fight of anything. So just because I am a Black woman doesn't mean that there aren't learned behaviors that I need to unlearn. And, I was fortunate that I have a family that fully just gave all their resources for my education. And I was able to go to schools like Phillips Exeter Academy. And at Phillips Exeter Academy, there was a student, Edmund Perry, who he was about to start at Stanford after he graduated, was gunned down by a police officer. This is the movie. This is bad. The Michael Jackson video, that's part of what that video is about. And I think that the tragedy here is that for something to become real, it has to be someone that you consider one of your own. And when you have places like education that aren't, like, I think people talk about diversity, right? Like what you're talking, like, we need to diversify leadership. What does that mean? It's because, as Frederick Douglass says, there's without no struggle, there's no progress. How, if you examining this resistance, right? I am a student that benefited from the students that came before who protested. I went to Wesleyan University where there's a Malcolm X house. That's because there are people that were even my mentors in high school sat in and said, oh, there's enough buildings with slave owners' names on it. Let's pop Malcolm X's name on something. And so when I hear you talking about the inclusion of Black studies and why it matters, I think it just goes back to narrative. If you write the story of the United States of America as though, the pilgrims came, were welcomed with open arms, and then the planters went to work, and you're completely eliminating the economic engine being unpaid Black labor, how can this country ever truly manifest? You say this is liberty and justice for all. And that while people may take this negative view, Black Lives Matter, you're complaining, it's like, no, we're here to make sure that what America says is gonna do is doing it.
Yes, yes.
Right. So, and I think if your education, that's what I think about in this pandemic, the people who are the most educated can stay home, can work, right?
That's right.
Education is now the big economic driver. It's not just how many slaves you have. If what's being studied, right, doesn't include everybody, the output is not going to include everybody.
Yes.
And if you could talk a little bit more with us about the inclusion of Black studies and why it since, you know, African Americans are kind of part of the story, why is it so controversial and how narrative and like lens plays into that? Because I think this is something I know you're going to drive home, but I want to make sure that we talk about this.
Real simply, or I'll try to make it as simple as possible. Without one of the core components of each lesson, each lesson I try to highlight this point, is that what the Black experience ends up becoming by the simple action of Black people being human, by the simple act of Black people pursuing their pursuit of what they say, what does the document say? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? The simple act of pursuing that becomes a critique of the society itself that has written in the foundation of its system that Black people not only do not have rights, but are not persons. That's what the Electoral College was about, right? We were considered 3/5 of a person to enable slave owners to count us toward the development of the people who would have represent them in Congress. So we weren't even human. So the simple act, and so in order for the system to establish that fiction, it required repression. So what Black studies represents is a corrective to the narrative, is a corrective to the story. It analyzes America for what America is when it's doing its job. When Black studies is at its best, that's what it's doing. The same is true with Latinx studies. The same is true with Asian American studies. The same is true with any other study that speaks to the experience of a people in the context of a society that was erected upon their exclusion. And so why is it important that this be taught? I mean, that should be, at this point, an obvious answer. And if you're still confused, if you still can't get it, then the question that you should be asking is, do you respect the African American experience? Do you see it as a vital part of, a vital, not just chapter in, because we're still here. We're still writing the story, but a critical component in the larger narrative of what America represents. Yeah. And if you can acknowledge that, then it should be a matter of fact conclusion. That is to say that it is as important that white students learn African American history as it is for Black students to learn African American history. For them not to learn African American history is what enables however many millions of white folks who voted in this past election to believe that there's a man in office who should be the president. To put it bluntly, that's what it amounts to. Because that whole campaign that individual is on right now, and all the millions, all the hundreds of elected officials marching behind him lockstep, all of the other millions of white folks that believe that, those groups of so-called Proud Boys and white nationalists going around violating people in the streets. All of that is possible based on a fiction of whiteness, based on a fiction of white identity that says we better than all of y'all. And everything that has been done in this society to accommodate y'all, that's just, that's tokenism. That's just appeasing y'all. Y'all don't really deserve this. And as Kaplan Education Foundation knows, you have students of color walking college campuses who have to contend with that they don't really belong here, even though they got the smarts.
I have a word on that, sir. Yes.
Absolutely.
That this is so being called to this project. Another thing I was working on through my alma mater, Phillips Exeter, is about anti-racism. And one of the pieces that I have tried to drive home, one of the reasons I even have the confidence and scope to do this is there was a class I took my senior year called The Black Experience in White America, taught by Russell Weatherspoon, who this is a Black man, beautiful family, that the importance of being able to have an academic lens where Black students, Latinx students who are non-white can sit in a classroom and be able to have a context that is not predominantly white in the examination of themselves and the examination of their environment is so key. And so the one thing I want to drive home is the fact that students all need to be peers, not props. Not that the diversity is an element to I used to feel as though we're there to spice it up for other students, but no, that everybody here is an equal. And that's not true. Black Lives Matter is a movement because the United States government legislated that Black lives did not matter. Right. You were not a whole person. That exists. That is American history. And I hope people understand if you put 400 years into enslaving people, you might need to put 400 years into repairing the intergenerational damage of reducing people to the equivalent of a horse or a chair. And I think to bring us home, that has to do with money. Yeah. And so I was definitely listening to the piece on student debt. And I think to close out, if you could speak to how student debt is a part of educational equity and racial justice, and that the price tag will always be a part of the conversation.
No question. Going back to the lesson before where I shared that graph, the cycle, where I spoke about the role education plays or the discrimination that Black people have experienced in the fields of education as a critical piece in a cycle of oppression that has developed this generational gap, if you will, with respect to wealth accumulation in this country on racial lines. That wealth gap that exists, that is a racial wealth gap, has everything to say to the ways that African-American families have to go through a number of obstacles, have to overcome a number of obstacles more than the average white family who on the surface would appear to be similar, okay? And so, when we talk about, as I do in this lesson, that that any attention that is paid to the work of ensuring educational equity, assuring educational inclusion of African-American students, other students of color, it has to incorporate a very clear component that addresses the question of student loans. If we're talking about higher education, and if we're talking about public education, it has to deal with the ways in which schools are funded. Those 2 points are key. And so I share this to say that if any elected official comes to your community and says this is what they plan to do to assure educational equity and the like, and they are not discussing those 2 critical points, I want you to question them. I'm encouraging you to lift up these questions and say, out of a space of clear sincerity, if we're serious about getting at this, so we can finally put these questions to bed. So we can finally go and tell our students or tell our children that, in fact, you do live in a meritocracy, that if you work hard, that is the only barrier to your ability to make it in this country. is how hard you work and how much you apply yourself. I have had the benefit of teaching at the collegiate level and doing consultation across the public school educational system over the last 20 years of my adult life. And I can share with you very plainly, and there are students, if there are students that will ever watch this and are watching now from urban communities, they will speak to this. They can speak to this better than I can, where they are passed into, class after class, grade after grade, straight A students, straight A students. Yet for them, and they could live in a community where, say, if it's here in Philadelphia, Temple University could be right down the street, could be 3 blocks away from their home, and it might as well be a galaxy away because of the barriers, the economic barriers that are put in their path. There are not enough scholarships schools can provide for students who are ready, who are prepared, who did everything that this society said that they should do, and who will yet not be able to go on to college. This, to me, if we're talking about the sins of a nation, this is one of those critical sins. Because as we all know, and as Kaplan knows better than most organizations, education is the gateway to wealth accumulation. And if you block those gates, then you are locking communities and families into generational poverty. We cannot stand for that. We cannot stand for that. No, it doesn't need to be. We don't need to wait for a police officer to shoot a Black child or a Black person to start a movement to raise these questions. This reality is present with us right now. And that, for me, is enough to create a passion within us to see that these questions are addressed and addressed appropriately. But what we know and what history teaches us, that, as you said, Rhoda, Frederick Douglass made it very plain. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. And those persons that sit in comfortable positions, no matter, where they are in the system, the director of an organization can be the president of a college, can be a professor in the classroom, whatever the case might be. We have to act based on the rightness of the issue, because it's not going to happen because we're the ones feeling it. It's not going to happen like that.
No.
The question for us has to be, is it right? And if we don't know enough, then we are the ones that have to go about the work of researching to understand and appreciate the pain that is being experienced in these very communities. Because they are expecting, they are looking at us saying, okay, you talk this equality stuff. Let's see it.
I think that's the only thing I would add to that, is that as my father, God rest his soul, it's 2 years since he passed, is that 2 main things he taught me is that you always pay for people one way or the other. Either you pay to invest in them so they can take care of themselves, or you will be responsible for taking care of them. And the reason you would be is because everybody matters. And as we are entering into a rebuilding, we can see that how you treat the most vulnerable among you is a definition of the health of a society.
That's right.
And so this educational journey, from the money up to all of it, if we are ever going to be free as a country, if this country that was founded on freedom is going to be free, you have to make sure that we invest in our population, in all of our population, that we can all get free. That's literally been my theme going into 2021, is that we got to get free. And to do that, our people need to be able to be properly educated, properly funded. And we just need to do what America has claimed it has been doing from the beginning.
Yes.
And so thank you for continuing to lead us into that. And I think this is a perfect handoff to Miss Nancy Lee Sanchez to bring us on home.
Well, I'm all in. Let me get myself together here. One of the things that you touched on, from debt to Black studies, to making sure that the education that we bring our scholars to is one that will include their story, their perspective. And at the Kaplan Educational Foundation, what we look to place our students in the best universities of, in the world. We define the best in our own way, meaning we really try to set those universities to make sure that they will make available, or that they have available, a robust Black Studies program. We assessed those universities on not their diversity, because again, I just want to make sure that we understand that there is not enough diversity in these schools. Don't go by the brochure only, right? Or by their website.
That's right.
That in reality, that the way to evaluate a school's commitment to diversity is how far it's come from its past, and is usually not far enough, and that there is a lot of work to be done, and they recognize that there's a lot of work to be done, and that includes making sure that students of color, low income, are coming out of that school as debt-free as possible.
That's right.
Because you cannot say we're going to accept students of color from low income backgrounds and then put on them all of this debt.
That's right.
I am someone that had to take out student loans to be educated, and continue to, but I understand that it is an investment that I'm making on myself, but I do understand that, debt without a proper education, without the proper resources, that making sure that we invest in those students' full range of abilities, right? And that we make sure that those students are able to be employed. It's key to their success. And then to your point of our making sure that they continue. This is why I am so proud that the foundation, that the Kaplan Educational Foundation is here with you. It's here with Rhoda having this conversation. Rhoda did attend a school that many people, it's in the top 3.
Yes.
And then, went on to college to a top school as well. But with that came a lot of sacrifice from her parents. And I just want to add one more thing, and I know we're running out of time. And that is that, and the point that you made about student debt, that students of color that have a poor experience in higher education, especially Black and Latino students, are the least likely to come back. So if you have a bad experience, meaning that then that debt gets saddled onto you, and so you no longer have a degree, you cannot come back. And so a lot of policies around debt is, how do you treat a student that is in debt, that has defaulted, and they want to come back? Do we continue to penalize them? Anyways, we can talk about this forever, and I'm sure we will.
These are very important conversations, Nancy, and what you're saying is, I just really need to stress this point. This is the critical conversation right now that is faced with Black families across this country. And the fact of the matter is that when I say Black families, I'm not saying that to say white families aren't concerned with these concerns, Latinx families, Asian, across the board. All families in this country right now are being stressed in ways this generation of Americans have ever experienced. But to talk about it, this is the key point. But when we center the experiences of Black folks, in simply doing that one thing, you ensure that all other folks are going to get what is theirs as well. It is in the act of normalizing and centering the most marginalized communities that true equality, inclusion, and equity is achieved. You can't do that unless you center those very communities. And that is what this process and series has certainly been about.
Absolutely.
It's always an honor to hang out with you and Rhoda.
Yes, universal design, inclusivity.
I just want to make sure we give our websites and our information. We're running out of time. I first want to make sure that I thank the person in the background that makes all of these things happen for us from a technology and production. And that is Dan Strafford, our ally, our friend in all of this, and someone who has been a big part of us putting this forward. I just can't thank you enough. And of course, Rhoda, if you can share the information about the foundation, our websites and all of that. And Iwara, of course, I want you to join how people can find out more about your work. about your consultant work and everything else. And so let me just go to Edouard, and then Rhoda, you can close it out.
Sure enough. Again, my website for folks that want to learn more about Origin is racial-justice.org, and check it out. Reach out to us and learn more about the work that we're involved in. Thanks.
And to learn more about the Kaplan Educational Foundation, you can head to our website, which is www.kaplanedfoundation.org. That's Kaplan with a K. Also, if you want to learn more about our publication, Nancy's publication, Your Guide to College Transfer.org, there are a bunch of free resources as well. Also, follow us on YouTube, clearly, but also Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for more updates from us. And just remember, folks, without struggle, there is no progress.
None. All righty. Thank you. We will see you next Wednesday for our last session. All right. Thank you. So honored to be with you.